Okay, so it's 1907. You're standing on a dock in Iquique in the far north of Chile, and you need work that pays. The work is inland. You go up from the coast into the Atacama, and the ground you'll be working is a crust called caliche, hard enough that you break it with explosive rather than with a tool. There's no rain here. Not less rain. None. So the water arrives by pipeline and by cart, and someone owns it. The town you arrive in belongs to the company. So does the store, the housing, the payroll office, the water tank. And no road out leads anywhere, except to another town exactly like it, owned by someone else, running the same books. So the question here isn't how much this job pays, it's what it pays you in. Now the picture most people carry of desert mining work is cheap labor. Remote posting, hard ground, nobody else hiring. That's the version everyone knows. On the pay line, it's wrong. Rates posted at the nitrate works were among the highest offered to general labor anywhere in South America at the time. Men crossed more than 1,000 miles of country to take them. Some came from the central valleys, some from the far south, some across borders drawn only a generation before. 2 qualifications. Those posted rates belong mostly to the contract and processing grades. The men carried on the company books, not to the majority working out on the pampa by tonnage. Keep that in mind. And the rate was posted in pesos and centavos. Here's the problem. It wasn't paid in them. Because there's a gap between the number written on a wage sheet and the object that lands in your hand at the end of a shift. In 1907, that object had a weight and a diameter. You aren't paid in money. You're paid in permission to buy. That gap is the whole industry. It's also why the strikes that ran through this desert asked for something stranger than a raise. They asked about the money itself. Start with why the job existed at all, because that's what tells you how it ended. This one belongs to the second of the 5 ways a profession dies. Input price collapse. The scarce thing gets cheap, the work stays perfectly possible, and nobody pays the old price for it anymore. But the scarce thing here wasn't the rock. Men in the Atacama weren't selling caliche, they were selling fixed nitrogen, and nitrogen sits underneath both of the 19th century's largest appetites. Crops need it. Soil farmed hard for 2 centuries runs short of it. Yields fall, and European and North American agriculture in this period is walking straight into that wall. Explosive needs it too. So the demand is real, it's growing, and it behaves the way food demand always behaves. People buy it at almost any price. Here's the structural point. Nitrogen is most of the air you're breathing right now. It's everywhere, it's free, and for the whole span of this story, it was commercially useless in that form, because nothing existed that could pull it out of the atmosphere at industrial scale. Which left the deposits. And by the turn of the century, a strip of desert a few hundred miles long held most of the world's traded supply of the one input that neither farms nor armies could do without. That isn't a mining industry. That's a choke point. So who was paying? Farmers in Europe, buyers in North America, and army supply offices. And the Chilean state took its cut at the port, an export tax on nitrate that in the best decades came close to half of everything the national government collected. A country wrote its budget on this rock. Remember that when the price moves. Now, there isn't one nitrate worker. There are 4 jobs stacked inside one town, paid on 4 different logics. At the top of the book sit the contract grades. Engineers, chemists, the payroll office, the men running the works and keeping the accounts. Small in number, on contract, and paid in legal tender. Some of them foreign. Hold on to that, because it means the highest wage figures that survive in the record belong to the smallest group in town. Then the boilerman. Caliche gets leached in a row of tanks called cachuchos. Hot solution, steam, long shifts on the company clock, and hazardous enough that the rate carried a premium. Then the haulers, moving broken rock from the field to the plant by cart and narrow rail, paid by the trip or by the load. And out on the pampa, the majority, the men who located the caliche, drilled it, broke it, and got paid by tonnage delivered. That last grade is most of the town, not a third of it. Most. You could move between grades in principle. In practice, the tonnage grade absorbed nearly everyone who showed up without a trade, and showing up without a trade was the ordinary way to show up. So when you hear a nitrate wage quoted, the first question is, which of those four it describes? The math later in this video runs on the tonnage grade. That's where the men were. So far so good. High posted rate, 4 grades, pick your line and go north. Now, here's where it breaks down. Getting to the job costs money you don't have. Recruiting was done by agents working the ports and the poorer provinces, and the standard arrangement was an advance, passage north, food on the road, sometimes an allowance for boots. You sign for it, which means you arrive at the works already owing. Then tools. In the tonnage grade you bought your own, and you bought your own explosive, and the work consumed both. A drill wears down, a charge fires once. So every ton you delivered carried a cash cost that sat on your side of the ledger and not the company's. Then housing. A room in the camp, charged to your account, because there was nowhere else to sleep for 40 miles. Not a bad deal necessarily, just not a choice. And then there's the part almost nobody accounts for. Water. There is no rain in the Atacama. None of these towns had a well worth the name, so water arrived by pipeline from the mountains inland or by tank car from the coast. Every liter of it had been purchased and hauled before it reached you. Somebody owned it on arrival. So water was a priced commodity, sold to you by your employer, in a place where declining to buy it wasn't available. Think about what that does to a wage. Your food, your room, your tools, your explosive and your drinking water all come from a single seller. And you still haven't been told what you get paid in. So take a decision that a lot of men in this period actually faced. Job 1 is farm labor in the Central Valleys. Low rate, seasonal, and paid in currency you can spend anywhere in the country. Job 2 is the Pampa. Several times the rate. Work available year-round in principle, and paid in something the company issues itself. Most men took Job 2. On the arithmetic available to them, that was the right call. Here's what that picture leaves out. The thing the company issued was a metal token, struck with the name of that specific works, and its value was expressed in pesos and centavos. It looked like money. It was denominated in money. It was accepted in exactly one store on Earth. Read that again, because that sentence contains the entire economics of this job. Not the desert, not the heat, not the tonnage. One store on Earth. Now slow it down, because the mechanism is more elegant than it first sounds. From 1879 onward, the tokens carried face values in the national unit, so the accounting was clean. Your wage sheet said a number in pesos, your pay said the same number in pesos. Nothing on paper was inconsistent. But a peso is only worth a peso if you can take it to a second seller and compare. That's not a moral point, it's the definition of a price. And there was no second seller. The company store, the pulperia, held the concession inside the works, and independent traders were kept out of the camps, so the man who set your wage also set the price of everything the wage had to cover. So watch the store's price list instead. That could be revised without touching your wage at all. Here's the structural point, and it's the one to carry out of this video. When one party controls both the numerator and the denominator, the number on top stops carrying information. You can raise a man's wage and take it back on the price of flour in the same week, and both moves are legal and separately defensible. And the workforce understood this perfectly. This is the part that settles the argument. When the nitrate district struck in December of 1907, and thousands of men walked down from the Pampa to Iquique, the central demands weren't a pay rise. They asked that wages be converted at a fixed rate against sterling, at 18 pence to the peso. They asked that payment in tokens end, and they asked that independent merchants be allowed to trade inside the works. 3 demands. All 3 about the currency, not the number. That strike ended when Chilean forces fired on the assembled workers gathered in Iquique. Hundreds died. It remains one of the worst episodes in the country's labor history. The reason it belongs in a video about economics is the content of what was asked for, which tells you exactly where the money was going. Now, the other side of the ledger, how the pay was actually calculated. In the tonnage grade, you weren't paid for work. You were paid for delivered, accepted rock. You located caliche, you broke it, you got it to the collection point, and then a company measurer assessed what you'd delivered, volume and grade. Caliche varies enormously in nitrate content, and low-grade material was worth less to the works, or worth nothing. So rejection was part of the pay structure. You'd already spent the explosive. You'd already spent the day. If the assessment came back low, that cost stayed with you. And the assessment was made by the counterparty, not by an inspector, not against a published standard you could appeal to. Then the deductions run, in order. The travel advance, tools and explosive, if you'd drawn them from the company. The room, the water, food already taken from the store on account through the month, because pay periods were long and you eat daily. What's left over is issued in tokens. So follow the money out. The buyer in Europe pays cash for nitrate. The exporting house takes its margin. The state takes its export tax at the port. The company takes the residual. Labor is paid from that residual, in an instrument the company prints, which returns to the company through a store the company owns, at prices the company sets. The money makes a circle, and the worker is on the inside of it. One detail to sit with, because it tells you the scale. Collectors have cataloged more than 2,000 distinct token varieties from this industry. Different works, different issues, different years, different metals. And most were struck outside Chile, because domestic minting capacity couldn't keep up with demand for them. So this industry imported its payroll. And the token from the work's 4 hours walk across the Pampa bought you nothing at all. 1913 is the high point. Chilean nitrate output that year runs to roughly 2.7 million tons. The works are expanding, and the export tax is still carrying the national budget. It's also the year the industry ended. Nobody in the Atacama noticed. Because in the same year, at a chemical works at Aarau in Germany, a plant came online that made ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. Fritz Haber had demonstrated the reaction at laboratory scale a few years earlier. Carl Bosch built the pressure vessels and the catalysts that made it run continuously. The first plant was small. Its output would not have registered against 2.7 million tons. Then the war came. Germany was cut off from Chilean supply by blockade, needed fixed nitrogen urgently, and expanded synthetic capacity at national priority and national expense. Wartime spending built the plants. And when the war ended in 1918, that capacity didn't shut down. It turned to fertilizer. Now, here's why the new process won, and it wasn't because it was more advanced. Look at the cost stack the Atacama had to carry. Break rock in a desert, move it to a plant, leach it, crystallize it, bag it, rail it to a port, load it, ship it across a hemisphere, then land it and distribute it inland to a farm. The synthetic plant deleted all of that, every line. It also did something the desert could never do. It could be built next to the customer. A plant in Europe supplying European agriculture pays no ocean freight, in either direction, ever. So the competition was never mining against chemistry. It was a long supply chain against a short one, and the short one wins at any comparable production cost. Chile's share of world nitrogen supply falls through the 1920s, not in one collapse, continuously. The industry's response was to cut cost per ton, which is where the second death mechanism arrives. From 1926, a new processing system associated with Guggenheim Brothers went into operation, first at Maria Elena, later at a second large works. It handled lower-grade caliche, and it used far fewer men per ton. So the surviving jobs were the ones that system didn't need. Then the Depression closed the market. Between 1930 and 1932, agricultural buying across Europe and North America contracted hard, and a commodity priced for a choke point had no choke point left to price from. Works shut their boilers. The towns had no other employer, no other water supply, and no other reason to exist. Camps that had held thousands were emptied within a few years. Some of them are still standing out there, unrotted, because nothing rots in the Atacama. Now, the math. 3 things are fixed before it starts. 1. This is the tonnage grade out on the Pampa. The majority, not the contract grades whose figures survive best. 2. Days worked, not 365. Output tracked shipping schedules, world price, and how often the works banked its boilers, so idle stretches were common. Assume a working year materially shorter than the calendar. 3. The starting figure is nominal. It's the posted rate, before anything comes off. So run the subtraction. Off the top comes the travel advance, which in the first year is the largest single item, because it was incurred before the first day of work. Then rejected loads, which cost you the explosive and the day both. Then tools and explosive on the loads that were accepted. Then the room. Then the water. Then food already drawn on account. What survives that is issued in tokens redeemable at one store, at prices set by the same party that set the wage. Which is why the honest anchor here isn't a currency conversion. Records from the period make clear that a day's tonnage pay, taken to the pulperia counter, bought a quantity of flour and beans that a Central Valley farmhand would also have recognized as a day's food. Not much beyond it. So the wage was several times higher, and the plate was roughly the same size. That's the trade. You moved 1,000 miles to raise the number and hold the standard of living constant. So where did that job go? 3 places, and only one of them is a factory. The production function went first. Fixed nitrogen is still made, in enormous quantity, and world agriculture now depends on it far more heavily than it ever depended on the Atacama. It's made in ammonia plants that run on natural gas, and a plant of serious size is operated by a staff of hundreds. Set that against the 60,000 men commonly cited for the nitrate industry at its peak, and you're looking at 2 orders of magnitude. That difference didn't move to another country. It went into gas, pressure vessels, and catalysts. The second piece stayed exactly where it was. Caliche also contains iodine, and iodine extraction in northern Chile is a real industry today, along with specialty nitrate for crops that want that specific chemistry. The deposits were never exhausted. They just stopped being the only option, which is what a second type extinction always looks like. But the third piece is the one that never left, and it isn't chemical. Strip out the metal, and the mechanism is simpler than it looks. A worker gets paid in an instrument that only clears inside the employer's own ecosystem, so the posted rate and the purchasing power become 2 different numbers. That structure has no dependence on metal, on deserts, or on the 19th century. It survives today in internal credit balances, in advances against future earnings, in deductions applied at source before the money is ever the worker's, and in credit extended by a platform against work performed on that platform. Same circle, different material. Wherever the party setting your compensation also sets the price of the tools, the access, or the credit you need to earn it, the ficha is still in circulation. It just doesn't have a diameter anymore. Now the counterfactual, and it comes down to one variable. Synthetic ammonia is an energy trade. You are buying nitrogen with power. Had the energy cost per ton of fixed nitrogen stayed anywhere near what it was in 1913, the Atacama would have remained the cheaper source, and those towns would still be occupied. That number didn't hold. It fell by roughly an order of magnitude over the following century, and it kept falling. One input got cheaper. 60,000 jobs and a national budget were downstream of it. So go back to the dock at Iquique, and the man taking the highest posted wage available to general labor in South America, walking inland toward a town with no road out. Nobody shorted him. He was paid in full, in a currency his employer printed. You aren't paid in money, you're paid in permission to buy. So check your own pay stub. What is your income denominated in? Who sets the price of the things you must buy with it? And are those the same party?